The Further Education of OverSoul 7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 15. OverSoul 7 has his troubles, and Will tries to drop out. I keep telling you, suicide is not on the agenda, 7 was saying. I'm just not getting through to you at all, am I? 7 sighed, not even trying to hide his disappointment. He'd appeared as the compassionate but wise young graduate teacher, and as the compassionate but wise old man as well. But Will was in such a rotten mood that nothing seemed to reach him at all. I am supposed to be your soul, 7 said, but we certainly don't seem to have much in common. I wonder if someone made a mistake somewhere. Almost absent-mindedly, 7 lit up a joint of marijuana, dear reader, and puffed it in just the correct, tender fashion. What do you think you're doing? Will asked. It's all sham. I know that. You're just smoking grass to make me feel at home or bridge the generation gap or something. And this classroom is all a dream hallucination too. And waking life is the same thing, even dreaming. I'm not stupid, for God's sake. 7, as the old man lowered his eyes and began to pace the classroom floor. Perfect hardwood sun splashing across in just the right fashion. All gone to waste. He started to feel sorry for himself. You're some guru, Will said accusingly. You can't teach me anything anyhow, because all learning is meaningless. Everything is senseless. I know that I'm asleep in bed and awake here at the same time. So what? This place is as senseless as Earth is, or life is. I don't belong anywhere, and when your own soul doesn't like you, you may as well give up. Will finished speaking and stood staring at 7 broodingly, dark brows raised loftily, the picture of young, nonchalant, studied, contemptuous disdain. Then he said evenly, Life is meaningless, and I don't intend to dignify it by staying around. You've got to stay around, 7 shouted, trying to think of something. You can't commit suicide anyhow without taking a course in methods. If you have your heart set on suicide, you might as well do it right. Besides, he added, suicide is a hard act to follow. This time Will came toward 7 threateningly, fist raised, yelling at the top of his lungs, I don't want to follow it with anything. You still don't understand. I want it to end. I want me to end. But why? 7 asked, for the 100th time as he stepped back judiciously. You have youth, health, money, intelligence. Life doesn't make it, that's all, Will replied, with such unconscious arrogance that 7 just shook his head. But 7 stood there stubbornly, and suddenly a great energy possessed him. Will, denying life, was so full of life that 7 decided to try again, and to present Will with Will's, own strength and validity. 7 summoned Will as Will was, and could be, and when Seven stopped changing shapes, Will stood there gasping, for he was staring at himself. Only this self was so fulfilled and accomplished and loving that on the one hand Will couldn't take his eyes away, while on the other hand he could barely stand to look. All the yearning he'd ever felt in his life was fastened on that image. To be that person, if anyone so marvelous could be considered human. And this supervision of Will smiled at him. And though Will heard no words, he knew that this other self grew up from his own roots. That his, Will's, doubts and challenges had somehow led to this supervision in which he himself existed. At the same time, though, and paradoxically, it seemed to him, Will felt his resentment grow in proportion to his appreciation, because this super will wasn't just a better will, which he could understand, but an Olympian self in ways he sensed but couldn't comprehend, a giant-sized self in terms of power and emotional reality. In fact, his ideas of the good self didn't fit this Olympian version at all, which was too powerful to be good, he thought uneasily. Yet he knew it wasn't evil either, and if it wasn't good or evil, then he didn't know how to handle it at all, he thought angrily. You don't really exist either, he managed to shout, and the super version of himself vanished. OverSoul 7 cleared his throat. Will was too shaken to pretend that he wasn't impressed, and now that image was gone, he felt its warmth and validity, perhaps because he wasn't as frightened. For a moment he felt himself responding, and in a split second he was the super version of himself, regarding his usual self with the craziest kind of love and sympathy. There was nothing conventionally pious or good about the love, which was emotional and personal, yet also composed of some gigantic objective kind of support, and the sympathy had too much humor in it to be saintly, yet was too full of appreciation to be condescending. Will became so engrossed in trying to figure it all out that he never noticed as the classroom walls disappeared, and a grinning OverSoul 7 waved to him from the window just before it vanished. But Seven's smile vanished at the same time, relatively speaking, because Will had raised an issue that bothered him considerably, at least in retrospect. Did he like Will? Or, more to the point, did he dislike him? Certainly he wished Will well, exuberantly and definitely. Only he found him tiresome because he complained so much and because he was so ungracious inside, when he was so graceful and attractive physically. You don't particularly like him, Cypress said, appearing out of nowhere. So don't try to wiggle out of it. In any case, I want to talk to you. I was going to check on Bianca, Seven said nervously. By all means. I'll go with you, Cypress replied. Now, about Will. Well, he doesn't like me very much either, or anyone else for that matter, Seven grumbled. He doesn't care for anyone but himself, and of course he doesn't really approve of himself either. And he has this grudge against life that I just don't understand. Lydia's self-absorbed at times, but she cares. I mean, she really wants to give Tweety a spiritual heritage and some knowledge of the gods. I know that's why she hasn't made her mind up to be born again. She wants the universe to be right for a new life. It is, of course. You and I know that, but... Now OverSoul 7 and Cypress were invisible, and without any forms at all, in what would hopefully be Tweety's bedroom, which was Joseph's old studio. They were at rest, yet part of their essences just kept drifting lazily through the bedposts which Joseph, in a paternal mood, had carved with the head of animals, and through the bureau, which was quite elegant, heirloom of Bianca's family, made of rosewood, and through anything else that happened to be there. Seven eyed the thick icicles that weren't even dripping. It was so cold outside that the window was almost entirely frosted over. "So I can relate to Lydia now," he said dejectedly. "But Will makes me impatient." Cypress turned quite still. With a semblance of surprise, she said, "Seven, I was under the impression that Lydia had made up her mind to be born again, and that the search for the gods was more in the nature of a last fling before birth." "That's what I meant to say," Seven muttered, blushing. "I'm sure she has decided." Cypress said sternly, "If I understand what you're trying so hard not to tell me, then Lydia at the least is still hesitating rather vigorously. And Will, who is ensconced in a very comfortable life indeed, has decided that he dislikes his existence enough to contemplate suicide, and—" "Don't say another thing," Seven cried. "All right, I'm beside myself with worry, and I'm trying to go along with human concepts about the gods, though this is very trying. Besides that, your Geoffrey is identifying so with Will that if Will does commit suicide, though I'm sure he won't, I don't know what Geoffrey will do. And since he isn't even one of my personalities to begin with, I don't understand his part in any of this at all." Cypress smiled in one of the most satisfied smiles that Seven had ever seen, as she changed back into the woman-teacher image with which she often conducted such discussions. "Geoffrey won't commit suicide now," she said. "He has the book to finish." "But when it's done?" Seven shouted. "Now I'm more upset than ever. He's writing this conversation down for the book, so he knows we're talking about him. I don't see how you got him to write the book in the first place." "Oh, Seven, I didn't get him to write the book," Cypress said. She started laughing, but with such sympathy and gusto that Seven couldn't be angry, though he tried. "Oh, is that what you think?" Cypress cried. "Well, remember that you decided to forget some things that you know, in order to relate to your personalities better." "Well, Geoffrey is writing this book," Seven began, dubiously now. "And you're right, he won't be happy with this particular section when he's read what he's written," Cypress added. "But he does know what we're saying about him." Seven was so acutely embarrassed and exasperated that he threw his hallucinatory 14-year-old arms up in the air with dismay. "But Geoffrey doesn't even believe we exist," he shouted. And Cypress answered with an almost Olympian laugh, "He's not as sure of that as he once was. In any case, we've been keeping him very busy, and material about Will does always upset him. So shortly we'll have to give him some time to do his own notes." Seven said, almost accusingly, "All of this just might be too much for Geoffrey. I don't like his identification with Will at all, as I told you, or with the suicide question." This time Cypress said, "Seven, the trouble with you is that you worry too much. You're always afraid that people will make the wrong choices. You're manipulating Will, or trying to, and he resents it. Manipulation won't work at all. Right now, Will's purpose in life seems to be to end it." Glumly, Seven nodded. "You do have the answer, the way to help him," Cypress said gently. "But the decisions must be his, and Geoffrey's must be his, of course." "What about Geoffrey when the book is done?" Seven asked. "Seven, the book will never be finished." A certain sound came into Cypress's voice, and suddenly Seven saw 1,000 books or more. Each page of each book with its own sequels and probably variations, and each written down by a different probable Geoffrey. OverSoul 7 winced. "It's the one Geoffrey we know that I'm speaking about." "Exactly," Cypress answered. Seven started to reply, but the icicle he was staring at suddenly began to melt, dripping past the windowsill that Seven saw was Will's, not Joseph's. "Will must be in trouble," he cried to Cypress. "Here we've been talking and—" Seven forgot what he was saying. The icicle was almost gone. The sun glittered on its vanishing remains for just a moment, and Will, staring at it, thought that he'd vanished from life as easy as the icicles melted in the sun. He'd take sleeping pills. Will had a plastic Cheshire cat that he'd found in a second-hand store. Seven liked to sit inside it when Will was in one of his moods, so that he could look out from a point of relative safety. Inside it now, he had an excellent view of Will, who was rigidly sitting on the side of the rumpled bed, staring hard-eyed out of the window at the point where the icicle had just vanished. "Shit," Will muttered. He'd awakened with a dream memory that infuriated him, and though the memory was already nearly gone, his anger grew. Now all he recalled was the feeling that he'd dreamed about himself, only a self so accomplished that next to that image he was worthless, or nearly worthless. Dead, at least his poor empty body would get some attention. Dead, he'd make them question. His friends and so-called friends. His traveling free parents and prissy professors. "How could you have let such a young man die?" Will cursed. There he was, full of self-pity again. Well, sleeping pills would take care of that, too. "You don't even like to swallow aspirin," Seven said mentally. "No, pills won't do," Will mused. accepting Seven's thought without wondering where it came from. Neither would drugs. If he was going to die, he wanted to make an impact. He smiled brightly, dramatically. If he was going to do it, he'd do it right. As Will thought that, the truly black, despondent mood that had been curling around the edges of his mind suddenly overtook him. He didn't even try to fight it, because he thought life was so shitty that nothing really mattered. At the same time, as this blackness clouded his thoughts, his feelings got faster and clearer in a particular dark fashion. His despair accelerated and had its own dizzy excitement, and pulsated with energy and action. While all this was going on, so as not to frighten himself overmuch, Will thought almost angrily that he'd make no decision. To hell with it. He'd leave it all to the fates. Suspense to the last moment. And even as he decided to leave it all open, Will was going out of the room, down the steps to the front of the house where his motorcycle waited in the driveway. Waited, he thought, like a black monster or like a knight's pursuing steed. Which would it be? He felt wild and free, devil may care, yet he was smiling inside himself, like death, he thought. And, liking the expression, he thought it again. There was still some, not much, slush in the streets, which glistened wet, almost shining black in the bright sunlight. And the stores were like cutouts of cardboard, to be knocked down like soggy playing cards. It was all a sham. He was dead anyhow, no matter what he did, he told himself. He didn't feel like other people did. He was unaffected, untouched. The sound of the cycle came thundering up, disturbing the entire neighborhood, he hoped, rousing any people taking afternoon naps. The furious whirl of Will starting up death's engine. The sound was so loud and he was traveling so fast that he laughed and cried at once, wearing no helmet so that the cold March wind could eat holes in his head. A great image. Why did he feel so damn creative at a time like this? He wished that hell he'd stopped commenting on his own goddamn thoughts. He stopped at a traffic light and decided to ride slower so that the cops wouldn't stop him for breaking some stupid traffic rule. Grinning coldly, he hit the highway out of town and forgot about driving slowly. The speedometer said 80. There was a bridge, an open mesh affair, very dangerous and wet, and he headed toward it. This wasn't going to be suicide, but a test, a contest. He'd hit the bridge as fast as he could go. If the cycle crashed and he died, well, his problems were over. If not, then he'd take it as a sign that someone or something wanted him to live, and that he had a place in the universe, even if he hadn't found it yet. Shit, he was losing the edge of his anger, and he wanted to sustain it. On the back of his motorcycle, an invisible OverSoul 7 groaned as he monitored Will's thoughts and tried to discover exactly how dangerous Will's course was. He kept transmitting Will's favorite memories into Will's stream of thought. but Will kept blocking them out. Instead, stubbornly, he concentrated on the distant bridge. Quickly, Seven got a mental glimpse of it. There it was, about 10 miles away, just as slippery as Will hoped, and it arched over a precipice course with a river far below, a curve at the far end, and 2 houses close to the road. Seven grimaced. The trouble was that he had to allow Will his free will, and a free will could be a dead will. The cycle was approaching 90. It was a light BSA that Will called euphemistically a gentleman's machine, and it— "Look out!" Seven shouted to Will, who had just missed hitting a car that came speeding around a blind spot in the road. But neither Will nor the other driver wanted to kill anyone else. Seven saw each wanted to go out in a private blaze of glory. Seven threw a sign of sympathy and understanding to the other driver's OverSoul as Will shakily eyed the bridge which now came into view. Really desperate, Seven scanned the neighborhood, contemplated his new clue. Will didn't want to take anybody with him if he died. Then, did Cypress send him the inspiration just in time? Seven remembered Will's love of kittens. How long did it take a motorcycle to stop? What was the safety factor? In a flash, Seven hallucinated a kitten choosing a tabby which seemed to be Will's favorite. The kitten, with a sore paw, sat mewing in the center of the bridge. Then it was up to Will, who saw the kitten and cursed. He'd take the damn thing out of its misery with him. To hell with it. The universe didn't give a shit about a kitten. He squinted. The cat had something wrong with it, or it would be running away. All Will could see now was the kitten, getting bigger and bigger as he approached it. Maybe it was committing suicide. It could crawl away. Couldn't it? What was the matter with the dumb, stupid thing? Even if he swerved, he might hit it. It'd probably stay on the side of the bridge for days because nobody cared. Who'd bury a dead kitten? Miserably, the kitten tried to scramble to its feet. Sensing triumph, Seven made it the most pathetic kitten imaginable. As it mewed, stood, tottered over. "Oh, double and triple shit," Will screamed, and screamed as the hottest, wildest pity overcame him, and he felt himself slowing down, stopping his own death, because in the whole cruel universe he wasn't going to add to the misery of it all by killing some dumb, stupid creature. The motorcycle skidded some more, as Will tried to stop in time, his fury and pity almost blinding him. He'd slowed down, but not enough. He swerved, avoided the kitten, and was thrown off the cycle just before it slammed into the side of the bridge. Everything seemed unrealistically still. Will landed on his hands and knees. He was a mess of scrapes and bruises, but he wasn't hurt badly. and he definitely wasn't dead. Turning around to look for the kitten, he shouted, "You dumb cat! That's one of your 9 lives." And OverSoul 7, exhausted, sighed, "Look who's talking." In chapter 15, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.